Thank you very much for inviting me to join this conversation today. As we have spoken before, language is my passion, especially in the academic space. As you know, language is a very important factor in my life, and I'm passionate about it, and I've done so many studies and research on it. And I think it's something I'm passionate about. So, but what I wanted to touch on today and share my views on. So, as we know, language is obviously a carrier of culture and society. Now, what I want us to imagine is a society without culture, because we are lacking in terms of language. That's the imagination that I want us to have. What kind of future do we have as Africans who are living in South Africa? What kind of future do we have? You know? And another thing is, I agree with the question that was posed. The question that is mother tongue languages, like, are they important for learning? Yes, fully agree with that. And a few scholars would agree with me on this one. Albert, Msimang, Lawrence, and Castings have done studies and research on this just to show and prove that it is important to have your students or your learners or your children learn in their mother tongue languages, especially from the foundation phase. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why I would agree with them. I agree with them in the sense that when you are confident in your own language, for example, I'm a Xhosa speaker, right? When you are confident in your own language, the language that you speak at home, it becomes very easy for you to comprehend other languages and to just to grasp them. It becomes easier. I'm not saying very easy, but it becomes easier because you understand basic concepts in your language. So that's why I agree with them. And obviously, as a student myself, I've seen this happen to me so many times where I get, for example, when I started, I think it was like grade 8, I went from a predominantly Xhosa school to an English medium school. It was very difficult for me to even understand. I would walk into an Afrikaans class and leave out of there without knowing what was said. I would even have to ask my friends what was going on, what was being said. And but because I understood some concepts in isiXhosa and I had obviously dictionaries, then I would understand what was going on. You know what I mean? I would go home, I would take out my dictionary and I'd be like, no, man, I know this in Xhosa, I know this in Xhosa. Oh, there must be a way that I can do this. Obviously, through that period, and when you get to university, right? When you get to university, it becomes more difficult for you as a non-English speaker when you deal with new concepts. Because when you're dealing with new concepts at university, you get somebody in front of you who's giving you all this information. And when you have all that information, you must first decode the language and be able to understand what is being said first before even understanding the work. So for us as Black students, and for us, just generally as Black students, it takes a longer period for us to understand the work than it would for an English speaking student who is being taught in English, or an Afrikaans speaking student who is taught in Afrikaans. We first have to take in the information, first decode what is being said in another language, what is being said, what is mean in my language, and then be able to understand the work that is given to you. So that's why it takes longer for us to be able to understand all of that. So let me just give you a background quickly. So when I was doing my undergrad, I did a study which was to develop terms, right, linguistical terms in isiXhosa. This was coming from a place where a lot of researchers and linguists in our field have said that African languages are inadequate to teach in academic. They basically inadequate in academia. They can't teach at university, and they can't teach at high school level. So I wanted to figure out, is this really possible? So I went and did a research on this to develop linguistical terms in isiXhosa. I mean, we do have these terms that exist in English. We have them that exist in isiZulu, Ndebele, or Swati. But how can I not have these terms in isiXhosa? That's where I was coming from. So I thought, okay, maybe these terms do exist, but do we have them in isiXhosa? And I realized that even if I don't have the term in isiXhosa, it's there in isiZulu, it's there in isiNdebele, it's there in Swati. Why can't I use that term to express myself instead of having to learn a new English term for it, or instead of having to be taught in a new language altogether, when I can use other languages which are mutually intelligible to the language that I speak, which is isiXhosa, and the languages that are obviously in the Nguni group are isiZulu, isiXhosa, Swati, and Ndebele. Why can't I use those languages to express myself and be able to deliver my work as a student? So I realized that actually the terms are there, and the study seemed to be was feasible at the time because the terms do exist, and therefore it would be easier to even develop new terms in those other languages where they don't exist, because they do exist in other languages, you know? So the concept is there for this, for a term or a word. Why can't we have it in another language, for example, in isiZulu or isiXhosa? Okay, so one other thing, we talk about decolonization of education, but when we talk about decolonization of education in South Africa, there's a lot of topics that come up. And for me, decolonization of education in South Africa means that I must be taught in a mother tongue language, my mother tongue language. I must not be taught in English. I must not be taught in Afrikaans, but I should have an option to go to a very good school that has resources, but still and receive a high quality education, but still be able to be taught in my mother tongue language, right? Let me tell you something why why that is important to me, right? When you get to university level, 100% of students enroll each year. Let me tell you something, across universities in South Africa, 47% of that original number are dropouts. Now, there are so many factors that affect this rate, right? But let me tell you something, the majority of this 47% of students is Black and colored students. Now, there are many factors that cause these students to drop out, the finances and everything, but language should not be one of them. And also, when it comes to this 47% of the students that have dropped out, they can no longer go to school. So what do? They want to look for jobs, right? They want to look for jobs. But do they get these jobs? No, they don't, because they're not able to communicate in the language that is a standard requirement in South Africa, which is English. Therefore, they spend long periods of time looking for work. And let me tell you something, the gap between those students and the students that have been socialized and the students that have been taught in English widens. It widens, even the gap between the middle class community and the poor community widens, because the people that are not able to speak in their mother tongue, to speak in English, they don't get employed. They are not skilled and they can't speak the language that is required for them to get the jobs. So what do? They become criminals, unemployment rate goes up, and the list goes on and on and on. Even, when it comes to higher education, even the Council of Higher Education, I think in 2013, they reported that universities are in need of multilingual support. But now when we're talking about multilingual support in classrooms, multilingual support in lecture halls, what languages are we then going to pick? Because we always say we have this problem in South Africa that we have 9 languages that we need to develop, right? So do we have funding to develop all these languages? And the answer has always been no, right? The answer has always been no, that no, we don't have enough money to develop these languages. And I think that is why we are still slacking to this day. And then I have a proposal. I propose that we do harmonization of languages, right? When I talk about harmonization of languages, I don't mean, okay, let me just quickly just define it for everybody so that they understand what I'm talking about. That's basically unifying mutually intelligible languages. For example, isiXhosa, isiZulu, isiNdebele, and Swati, to make them one language, a Nguni language, right? But when I'm talking about harmonization of languages, I'm not talking about the spoken version of the form of the language. I'm talking about the written form of the language, right? Whether this written form is used in academia, it is used in informal institutions, where it is used, for example, in speeches in parliament, in mass media communication, our people would have a greater chance at being able to comprehend and be able to be able to participate in the economy if we were to have this one major language. Obviously, I'm not saying that would be the one language that would be used in South Africa. Other languages could be used too. For example, the Sotho cluster could group their languages together and use that language to communicate to a wider audience, instead of having somebody who is speaking isiXhosa or who is speaking isiZulu speaking to a smaller group of people. If we were to have a harmonized language, which is a Nguni or a Sotho cluster language, then we would be able to accommodate a wider audience, like in terms of education, in terms of when the government is communicating with the nation, mass media communication, we would be able to reach a wider audience than we are doing at the moment. And now when I'm talking about harmonization of languages, I'm not saying these languages should compete with each other. No, they're not. In one group, these languages should be the ones that are complementing each other instead of competing with each other, because there shouldn't be a language that's got a higher status than the other. They should all be equal, but just the written form should just take away from all these languages, right? I mean, this language harmonization, it's not something new, it's not a new topic. If you were to read up on Dr. Nhlapo in the 1940s already, he spoke about it, he brought it forward. He was like, he realized that there are many languages that needed to be developed, right? And harmonization was at that time a solution for languages, for money to be spent on less groups than to be spent on all these languages. I mean, a lot of scholars have researched on harmonization. Carstens Makalela and Alexander, like Taka, a whole lot of people have researched on harmonization. And when I did my master's, which was last year, when I did my master's, I did it specifically on language harmonization. And I took isiZulu and isiXhosa, and I put them together and compared them together. And I realized that, you know what, isiXhosa and isiZulu, they are very similar languages, but because we come from the different locations that we come from, our languages differ a little bit, and they differ in small parts of the words. Actually, they differ in the little morphemes. They differ like in the small segments, in the smallest segments. For example, like a typical example, in isiXhosa, we say umntu, and in isiZulu, they say umuntu. There's like one segment that's missing from isiXhosa. And if you were to track the origin of the word, you would find that some people have omitted some segments and some people have inserted some segments into their languages. And that's the only difference that we have in our languages. For example, like, language harmonization, it's not a foreign concept in Africa, first of all. Zimbabwe has Standard Shona, and Standard Shona comes from 6 dialects of dialects of languages, and it was put together so that they can have a written form, one written form. And this happens all over the world. In China has more than 4,000 languages, but it has one written form. In Norway, Yugoslavia, even in English has other dialects. There's American English, the British English, and even Nigeria has Nigerian English. But what form of written form do they use? They only use the standard form. So why can't we do that with our own languages and be able to elevate them to a level where they are competing with English and Afrikaans on bigger scales in academics, in formal platforms? Why can't we have that? These are different times that we are in, COVID has brought about some disparities when it comes to the education system in our country, especially between underprivileged communities and the middle class. So we, as the students, researchers, linguists, should be using this time and take advantage of it and use it to develop our languages so that they are able to compete in those levels. And we should be creating privilege for our children and for our future. When I mean privilege, I mean as a child, you should not be spending more than 2 hours to go to another school where in the mornings, to go to another school where you are going to be taught in another language altogether. These schools, good schools with resources, should be at our backyards, and they should be able to cater to our African students. And with that being said, when we are talking about privilege, that's what we should be talking about, especially in the South African education system. Thank you very much, Selvin. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for this opportunity, and just to share my views and speak about the matter at hand. I really appreciate this platform.